Greetings, everyone. We're delighted to have you join us today. This is Valerie Fletcher. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design, and this is part of the IHCD Global webcast series. And today, we're going to be talking about something that has become an obsession, one might say, here at IHCD and among many of our colleagues around the world, and that is designing for people whose brains work differently. And we have with us Jean Hewitt, who is an extraordinary resource. Many of us have become quite hooked on in her work as the lead writer for Design for the Mind. And I'm a little jealous, I'd have to say, that our British friends were wise enough to appreciate that this topic of design for people whose brains work differently, design for the mind, was so compelling that it was important to bypass the usual arcane, long process of developing new standards. This is called a publicly available specification that Jean is going to be talking about today. And it is because there was a need that could not wait. And I think that is a measure of how important this is today, and also a measure of the wisdom that there is a mechanism for doing that in Britain. So we have the primary author. Jean has been at this for a while. She has promised me she will share a little bit about how this whole idea was born years before the publication in 22. And I think everybody is aware that this publication is freely available. You can get it online without much trouble at all. Very straightforward. What we're going to expect today, Jean is going to be presenting for something just shy of an hour, and then we will be welcoming everyone to join us, because we think this is something that is very much about a dialogue. And I think all of us know that what we know today is not what we will know tomorrow if we're doing our job. And so the dialogue this afternoon is extremely important. And we will be, the whole broadcast will be open captioned in English, and there will be a recording that will be made available as an archive within the next 2 weeks for those that could not stay for the whole thing or were unable to catch everything. So you know you have a second bite at this information. So please plan to hold your questions, even your urgent questions, until the end. We want Jean to have the floor for her entire presentation, but then I promise you we will allocate as much as an hour for your thoughts and questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jean Hewitt from Buro Happold, a global engineering firm headquartered in London, but has a massive impact and footprint in the world. So Jean, please, welcome. We're so grateful to you today for giving us your wisdom and your time.
And I'm very delighted to be here as well. So it's a topic I always love to talk about and share. And I know that I will get lots of new information that I will, it's a constant learning curve, as you say. So I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, great. We're in business. Wonderful. So a little bit about me. I've been an access and inclusion specialist for a long time. I'm at Buro Happold in the Inclusive Environments team. I'm also a teacher at honorary professor at UCL, and currently a UK Government Disability and Access Ambassador for the Built Environment, which is a voluntary role. I've sat on the British Standards Committee here for some years, 16 years and rising, I think, and involved in lots of other things as well. And that is where and how I arrived in the position that I'm now in and talking to you about neurodiversity. So I'm going to, in a couple of moments, talk about what neurodiversity is, just in case there's anyone on the call that hasn't kind of had that explained to them before. I'm sure you probably know more about it than me. The background to the standard, how it was developed, and a bit of history, as Valerie has said. And then when kind of a little bit of a dive into each chapter of the standard, and then look at sensory inclusion in a wider way at menstrual, menopausal health, and some other things that we have discovered here in the UK with some of our emerging standards. I'm going to then finish off with a case study of the Royal National Institute for the Blind building, which has won a few awards in this area, before we move on to Q&A. So neurodiversity. as many of you will know, it's the variation in neurocognitive profiles across the whole population. So we are all collectively neurodiverse, and then within that there will be neurotypical and neurodivergent people. So humans don't come in a one-size-fits-all brain-wise any more than we do sort of body size or appearance. There are always going to be natural and very normal genetic variations. We're all a little bit different with our brain types. We think and process information differently, learn new things in different ways, particular learning styles. We communicate with others perhaps in slightly different ways. We navigate in different ways as well, and we experience the world slightly differently to one another. So what I've done here is just put some key terms that we've used in PAS 6463 here at the bottom, because we did have quite a long debate, I would say, about language and what labels we should put into the standard. That was kind of one of our first hurdles to get over. And generally, we ended up with a pretty good consensus that we should use the term sensory processing information and sensory processing differences, and not tie it to this is autism or ADHD or dyspraxia, dyslexia, dementia. And of course, it encompasses all of those things, but everyone is slightly different. So that was one of the challenges we had. So when we say neurodiversity in this standard, we're talking about everyone. Neurotypical is kind of a stereotypical norm or perceived stereotypical norm, and not a spiky profile. Now, what do I mean by a spiky profile? If this was a kind of a very kind of straightforward line through the middle, this is a robot. Nobody has a profile like that where you are exactly the same performance level at everything. So music, drama, maths, English, science, etc., etc. We're most of us, if we're neurotypical, will look something like this. And most of us, if we're neurodivergent, will have a much spikier profile. There will be a much bigger difference between the challenges and the things that we excel at, basically. So that neurodivergent one then is not fitting the majority neurotypical model. And then there is a subset of that, which is neurodegenerative, which is having a progressive condition such as dementia. So neurodivergence is often with you from birth, although I recognise it can also be caused by a traumatic brain injury or an incident. The neurodegenerative is very much a progressive condition that's going to change and typically comes with kind of older age. This is a little drawing by Professor Amanda Kirby in the UK, very well known for her work on neurodiversity, and she was on the steering group for the PAS. And I quite like this. I always like to use it. Our brains are not in neat compartments. We can put people in boxes, and sometimes it's helpful too. Certainly in the UK, there can be funding through learning policies and practices that can come once you have a diagnosis. But basically, we're also saying that we're all messy and we're all neurodiverse in so many ways and so different. And that comes back to one of the key challenges that we had. And I'll talk in a moment about the timeline, but the sheer volume and diversity of the whole thing was one of the barriers from the early years as to why things didn't move forward when we look at the built environment and this area. And then we're talking about the senses. We'll be talking about senses a lot in a minute. We say that humans have got 5 senses. I think there's probably hundreds, but the 8 key senses that we talk about in PAS 6463, and when we talk about neurodiversity, are usually these ones. So we've got, you know, the usual ones of hearing, smell, sight, taste, touch, but we've also got these, the interoception, so our perception of what's going on, how hot we are, how cold we are feeling pain, our proprioception, how far are we from something? Are we someone that waves our arms around and always manages to knock everything off the shelf every time? Have we got a vestibular imbalance? So I'm married to someone who's got Meniere's disease, which affects both hearing and balance. But there are many other reasons why your vestibular might be different from the perceived norm. And one of those can be COVID, because that can affect balance and sense of smell as well. So there's a lot to think about. This image comes from a neurodiversity toolkit, which has been introduced in the UK by the Royal Town Planning Institute. So this is people working in town planning who've decided this really needs to be looked at from a macro level. So as I said, we talk about designing for sensory processing differences. The barrier that was coming up was everybody is so different, we cannot do this. And when I was asked about being technical author and we had our very first conversation, I said, I believe we can take the very worst offensive things out of the built environment. I don't think we can fix it and make it perfect for everyone, but let's start by taking the worst offenders out. So that's where we were coming from. And when we looked at it, when you have a sensory processing difference, quite often there can be a difference in how you experience things through the senses. So how you experience noise or sense of smell or how you see things. And what we found was that 70% or more of people with a diagnosed neurodivergent conditions, such as autism, ADHD, etc., experience hypersensitivity to one or more of the senses. So that is a very extreme physical sensitivity, which can cause sensory overload. Sensory overload is horrible. It can affect your heart rate, your breathing, blood pressure. It can make you confused, obviously can instill anxiety, make you very mentally distressed, and can affect your behavior, and so on and so forth. So 70% of people experiencing neurodivergence will have that, and others may have no sensory difference, or they may be hyposensitive. You quite often will notice this more in children, where they will perhaps use a stimming toy or be rocking or something for sensory stimulation. In adults, it can be less obvious, particularly in mainstream, because people will simply find their own ways to stimulate. So they might have headphones on with music on it constantly, or they might have those headphones on because they're trying to shut sound out. So lots of devices we can use. But generally speaking, when you are hyposensitive, it's a somewhat easier experience as an adult going around your day-to-day business, because you can add in, you can have fidget jewelry, you can have stimming devices in your pocket, you can add that music, you can wear colourful clothing, you can change your laptop screen and so on, and bring in your own stimulation as you move around and go around your day-to-day activities. And of course you have control as an adult of the environment around you, unless you have a learning need. With hypersensitivity, the built environment around you literally can bombard you from the moment you wake in the morning with sounds that you don't want, or patterns that confuse you, or shapes that disorientate, and so on. So you can see that that was a much bigger fix from the built environment perspective, and why our focus was there. I just want to touch on adults versus children, because I think it's really important to recognise that we have a lot of sensory rooms going into schools, which can be quite stimulating, colourful environments, and generally they're aimed at children who are hypersensitive and kind of need that stimulation, spinning, rocking, etc., etc. The differences with an adult, of course, is that we can control what we wear, we control whether we wear headphones. A lot of these children can't articulate for themselves that they're either too young or they have delayed learning in some way. So it's really, really important that we consider separately the needs of adults and children. The other thing to mention is that I'm talking about diagnosis there and the percentage of diagnosed people, but actually there are many who are undiagnosed. Now, in the UK, I think at the moment, through the national health system that we have, there's something like a 2 to 4 year delay on an adult getting a diagnosis, because the result has been overwhelming. There's so much awareness now and so many people recognizing some of these traits in themselves. So it's caused quite a backlog. So there are lots of people who are undiagnosed. And I think also with age, it becomes more difficult to get a clear diagnosis as well. Certainly for somebody over 60, that's the case. I also think there are lots of people who can be neurotypical with spikes in one or two areas, might not kind of meet a full diagnosis of this. There are other people I've come to realise that are unknowingly affected by other things, which can give them sensory processing differences, which isn't around their neurodivergent brain type at all, but could be something like hormonal changes. COVID has caused a lot. Menstrual, menopausal health very much overlaps. And I will talk about very briefly at the end about a standard that we've got in the UK, and the overlap and coincidence in how people were affected was remarkable. So experiencing symptoms, quite often people don't realise the built environment is a contributor. They might be exhausted. and they don't know why they're fatigued, and they don't know why they're feeling funny, and they don't actually recognize it could be something like the lighting. There could be a flicker in lighting, for example, that people don't realize that they're seeing, but the brain is seeing it. So it could be things like that: migraine sufferers, people with vestibular conditions, perimenopause, pregnancy. All of these things can affect our sensory sensitivity. So it is a very wide audience, I believe, and a lot of people can benefit from these considerations. So it isn't a case of we need to think about neurodivergence in particular building types. It should be everywhere we go, everything we visit. Learning spaces were found to be the most important, but everywhere matters really. So development of PAS 6463 then, I was asked to talk a little bit about a timeline on why this has happened in the UK, because there is seems to be some recognition that we've kind of the first to get a formal standard. In 2009, I did a piece of work, because I've been in access and inclusion for many years now, and I was asked to do some sensory audits of higher education premises in the UK by the Equality Challenge Unit. And I said, well, when you say sensory, I'm assuming you're meaning sight and hearing. That was a very common thing to look at in an audit. And they said, oh, and autism. So at that point, I thought, right, I know a little bit about autism, but I'm not expert in it. But I worked with the Autistic Society, who shared with me what the common challenges were, and that formed that initial piece of research. After that, and not directly connected with me, there was a BSI formed working group on sensory inclusion, because we had a couple of people on our British Standards Committee for Access who had lived experience of this and really wanted this to happen. I have to say that working group didn't go too far. People found it very challenging to think about how we might do something when everybody in the room seems to have a very different experience. In 2016, the BSI, I think probably with a bit of nagging from one or two individuals, commissioned some research with the Helen Hamlin Society, who I think are kind of well known across the world. And they did a very qualitative piece of work, talking to individuals who consider themselves to be neurodivergent or neurodiverse, it was often commonly called then. And that included some people with dementia, but mostly people with autism, ADHD, etc. And they talked about what bothered them about buildings and going out and places they visited, which is really, really helpful. And from that, there were 8 or 10 strands, of keywords like noise and lighting and brightness and things like that, that were obvious things to tackle. And then the BSI decided that a PAS could be introduced. I'm not sure at what point Transport for London were involved, but I think they were probably there from the outset. They were certainly the first contributor to the funder, because it's privately funded. So what a PAS is, and I'm not sure that you have the same thing in the US, is a privately funded but publicly available standard. So TfL were the first on board. They wanted it, obviously, because Transport for London have a mix of, well, everything from, I think, taxis and boats to an airport and many underground stations and overland. And these are really busy and challenging environments for people who are sensory hypersensitive. So they really wanted to find out what they could do about it. I was approached in 2019, I think early 2019. We were having a conversation about something else with the British Standards Committee, and they suddenly asked, well, they had this new standard coming up, would I like to be technical author? And of course I said, well, yes, I find it really interesting, I'd love to be. And we were short of funders. So Bureau Happold is where I work. They funded my role as technical author instead of me being paid by BSI. And Forbo Flooring came on board as well, because flooring is a very big area that can really make or break a space in terms of visual busyness. So they wanted to find out more. And my client at the BBC Workplace, completed the circle as the final sponsor, which is wonderful. So I was appointed as technical author, which basically means I write stuff, but other people are feeding in. And a lot of the wealth of information that came into the PAS 6463 was from the steering group of experts we appointed. I'm going to say there were about 10 of us, but at some meetings it was 8, and it moved around a little bit. But They were people with lived experience and quite often, or at very least vast professional experience in this area. So we made a start at Bureau Hapwood in 2019 with a literary review. Suddenly COVID then happened, and we were asked whether we wanted to continue or not, or just park it until this little pandemic thing was over. And we said, well, we could do it online, because we were just getting to grips with how to do online meetings on a regular basis. So all of the meetings for this document were online. And my brief was to produce 40 pages, a high-level document in 9 months to kind of crash it out, which is a very fast track. My first draft missed that somewhat. I think it was about 12 months and it was 69 pages. I found it really, really difficult to leave things out that might matter to somebody. And we went out to public consultation, I think for about 6 weeks. It wasn't for long. And we got 4,000 comments back. It isn't quite the top ranking number of comments from BSI. I believe they got more on sustainability, but you'd expect sustainability perhaps to get a lot of comments because everyone knows about it. I was quite shocked by the 4,000 comments, but really pleased. But I then took another year to work my way gradually through those because I had a day job too. And some, there was a lot of fine tuning and some extra content that went in. There wasn't anything negative that said that like this first draft is awful. It's like, oh, could you just write about this, and could you just add another sentence here and another sentence there? And it of course had to have a very rigorous checked process with the steering group as well involved before we got to the final document. So it was a little bit of a longer journey, 2 years in fact, rather than 9 months we'd originally intended. So that's what a PAS stands for, publicly available specification, and they're put out there as an evaluation standard. They're meant to be tried and tested, and after a 2-year period, people feed back, and then a decision is made as to what should happen to that information. So it's always a sponsored fast track route. What to say? Oh, in case you're wondering, why it's got the number 6463, you get to choose a number as long as it hasn't already gone. And what we decided to do was to spell mind on telephone keypad. So that's for your trivia quiz later. So here's the front cover, which we did at Bureau Happold. The scope at the beginning could have been everything. It could have been special educational needs and dementia care homes as well. But we realised that the document would have been absolutely vast, and there was a lot of information already out on those other areas. So we decided to restrain it to building or environments for mainstream public use. As I say, it gets reviewed every 2 years. So it's already finished its first review. Its first review found that we had pockets of extra information, but not enough to stall its dissemination across the world because it's been really, really far-reaching. I mean, this time last year, I was invited to Australia to talk about it. I know that Canada are developing something similar. I heard today from Valerie that India are looking at this as well, and Europe certainly are. And it's crept into building regs and everything here in the UK that was really unexpected in the early life of a PAS. So that is the take up by people with a lived experience who are driving this agenda forward. So our next review will probably be the end of next year. I do think at some point it's got the potential for incorporating either into a new standard of its own or bits of it going into existing British standards. I've got a couple on the bottom of the screen here. This is our BS 8300, which is all about accessibility and inclusive design. So it could fit well there, but it's already quite a big document, so I don't know if that will happen. There were also people asking if it could become an ISO, so it was an international standard, or it could even just be updated as a revised PAS version 2. There are some PASs like that around, and that might be what happens initially, I think. So who benefits? As I've said already, anyone and everyone can benefit from this. We deliberately avoided those diagnoses and labels and made sure that the language was very carefully structured. So it's really meant to be beneficial for really the broadest spectrum of neurological processing differences, whether you fall in within neurotypical most of the time or at the extreme end of neurodivergent. And I think there's a very natural overlap and a general benefit on mental health and wellbeing for everyone too. So our target audiences when we were writing it were the built environment. So that's architects, designers, planners, facility managers, decision makers within buildings, obviously employers, occupational therapists. We looked outside and in. We looked at design and management because there is quite a lot you can do with how a building is managed, or a facility or a theatre is managed, etc. In addition to how it's designed in the first place. And we believe that the content is relevant to most building types. We were concerned that we stated in the standard, because you do need to state what you don't cover, that we didn't feel that we were covering specifically enough dementia care settings, but there is a vast amount of guidance around in the UK on that. Also, our special educational needs, so specialist schools, they have what we call building bulletin guidance, which is why I've got BB here, and thought that was kind of enough and it was already done. However, having said that, I am currently in the middle of working on some guidance on sensory inclusion and sensory comfort in mainstream schools in Scotland. So I think there's always other things that we can do, and I think sometimes looking at sector-specific guidance is also helpful. So this is what the contents list looks like. It's your typical kind of journey through a building where you start off with developing the brief, you look at the site and the building layout, and then how you find your way around, outside to inside. What are some of the kind of services, building services requirements that you might have? And then we've got sections on acoustics, light, finishes, the fixtures, fittings and furniture, they're very important, and ending with kind of the deeper spaces like quiet spaces and how we get people out in an emergency. We've got some icons here kind of representing some of those different chapters, and I've put them into bubbles to try and get across the messaging really is that the three most important that by far affected the majority of people who had different sensory experiences on a day-to-day basis was this one, acoustics, lighting, which includes reflection and glare, and wayfinding. So lots of people with neurodivergent traits have difficulty wayfinding. And then our first kind of section was developing the brief, really. So after we've kind of introduced the topic, we took our Royal Institute of British Architects a plan of works, which lists lots of rebus stages as you go through the life of a building, and did the equivalent as to what you might think about in terms of neurodiversity. So that was a key thing we did. And since our document came out in the UK, the PAS 6463, RIBA has published this one, Inclusive Design Overlay, and that is very, it doesn't repeat what we've said, but it's very complementary. They work very well together, so that's helpful. We talk about strategy and commitment up front in this for early section, and we talk about stakeholder engagement in a big way as being important and should be at the heart, but we don't say necessarily how to do it. I have since written a very large document, a 400-page guidance document for Sport England, and we have a whole chapter on stakeholder engagement, and that includes how to engage with neurodivergent users in there. So I think that's something that will be signposted if we update the PAS. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say on that one. We look at site and building layout. We look even at things like the facade, the shape of facades, reflection and glare from, we've got a lot of glass and steel buildings going in. What about heat gain? What about people that don't have good sensory perception in their fingers and their hands? Certainly many older people lose that ability to sense it quickly enough before they've scalded. You start touching hot surfaces like a stainless steel handrail, or the metal surface on a building can make a difference. It can burn you. We also looked at appearance and patterns. I was working on Moorfields Eye Hospital in London. They're getting a new hospital, and many visually impaired people were saying, we don't want anything that's got a really startling appearance in terms of patterns. And somebody pulled together this image of just the different types of buildings and patterns you can get now with modern design. And how when you collectively look at that can cause some sensory overload to people with sight impairments, but also, of course, that will affect people who are visually hypersensitive. Patterns can be quite difficult for the brain to process, particularly checkered and linear, which I'll come on to. We also look with the buildings on orientation as to where you put the building on the site, and maintaining good sight lines and windows so that people have good sight lines in and out of a building, depending on the building type, of course, so that you can prepare yourself before you enter or before you leave for what's in the other environment, making that transition easier. And transitioning was really important in the wayfinding section too. So we look at the use of colour and shape. Attentional bias is something that seems to happen more in neurodivergent people than people who are neurotypical. And that is where you see a sign or something connected with wayfinding, and you believe that's what you're following, and you're following that trail of signs or something. And then it changes, and how you can completely miss other signs as a result. So it's kind of an attentional deep focus on a particular type of thing. So that was interesting for me because I get lost all the time, and I think that might be why. We looked at technology and how that might help people, but how the clarity of the space and the signs and where they're placed really, really important, as well as identifying key facilities. So, for example, how important it is to know when you arrive at a new building where you can go for assistance. How do you find the toilets? Is there a quiet room? Because many people after a journey will want to go and recover and reset, and the quiet room might be the very first thing that they seek out. And if they can't find that, they may then look for a toilet where they can go and hide for a little while and recover. Really important thing, as I said about the windows and the view in, this advanced information and preview of a space, really, really important. Sensory mapping is where we try to document where the noisy areas are, where the bright lighting is, and things like that to help people. And I think this is a growth area for many of us working in the built environment. This is what we're going to be doing. We've certainly done some research on it now, following the PAS. And I do think this is certainly places like Museum of London have already done it, but they are getting more and more advanced in how this is done. We looked at how technology will help people. So some apps are specifically designed for sight loss, but many others will be designed for people who just struggle with wayfinding more generally. And one of the key things what I found of interest was viewing heights and head movement. So I've always thought about disabled people not being able to kind of put the head up and down as they look at a high level sight, but not realizing that people with balance conditions and people with neurodivergence quite often can feel very, very dizzy and sick when you're doing a lot of this, to keep looking up for signs and around. So there's some minutiae in the PAS, as well as some big ticket items, if you like. And then we looked at external spaces and access to nature. I think this is an area where we can do a lot more now than we could at the time, but we looked at kind of the levelness of the surfaces, and again the clarity. And when I'm now working on the schools guidance for Scotland, and they are merging outside and in and asking me to write, they've asked me to write about all of the different things that people need and expect and want in a way that doesn't matter whether you're talking about outside or in. It's the same principle that applies. So I think that's quite interesting approach to it. Well, we have some of these in the UK. They are disappearing a little bit now. We call them colourful crossings, and it's kind of artwork instead of a road crossing. If you don't have this, you might be shocked by its sudden appearance, but it's suddenly a plethora all across London. Transport for London, Access Association in the UK and everything have done a lot of work to try and stop it happening. I don't mind seeing these on pavements where people have got a breakout space and it's seating or something, but to have them imposed on a road surface where people might be overstimulated, distracted, it just sounds like a recipe for accidents. So that's paused at the moment in the UK, but it might be something that is happening near you. And then on internal layout, safely transitioning from one area to another, the layout, the symmetry of it, trying to kind of avoid anything causes any optical illusion, unless you're in a museum, of course, where it's part of an experience. But even that, we would give warnings now. Section 9 was on mechanical, electrical and plumbing, so building services. It wasn't something I'd thought of as needed or was readily on my radar when we first started, but it very quickly became a really important part. That control of air quality, hypersensitivity to odours and chemicals is extremely common, and more so since COVID. Even the cleaning products and the perfume products that we use. So we have got a section in there about the volatile organic compounds VOCs, and how we can choose better products that don't off gas. I mean, formaldehyde is a key one, but we can also use plants to partly help to clean the odours in the environment around us, and as well as facilities management, acknowledging that this is happening and maybe doing purge, put a cold air push through the building in the early hours can often be really, really helpful in controlling this. And then on acoustics, really, really important, and one of them, this and lighting are the more technical sections, I would say. There is this inability to adjust comfortably to a variation in noise levels by some people. And the acoustic layout and the zoning can offer us different options. So our acoustics team and Ecofon work quite hard on this section, taking criteria from our school standards for special schools and uplifting it further. And now it could be as simple in an office building as having a kind of lone working area as your top floor and collaborative work on the bottom floor. But more often than not, it needs some jolly good acoustics putting in somewhere. And I'll talk about this again in the case study to come up. Obviously, floor finishes can have acoustic absorption, and we can have acoustic ceiling tiles overhead and everything. We want things that reduce echo. There was some talk about the soundscape and therapeutic recorded sounds, and I do think that's beneficial in some environments, but it's not for everybody. And some brains can detect a false overlay sound on top. So I think we have to be very cautious with it. So not to rule it out, but I think stakeholder engagement with all of this is really, really very significantly important. What we found with the noise levels is there's a huge variation in what people are sensitive to. So it's not just loud noises or intermittent noise or unexpected noise. Sometimes it can be a really soft little sounds like a soft hum or a ticking clock or a dripping tap or someone chewing. So you can have misophonia and you can be very sensitive to tiny sounds as well as perhaps being shocked by the higher volumes as well. Very common and very important issue is noise and acoustics. When I spoke to our acoustics team about it, they said it doesn't always have to cost a lot of money. Sometimes if you decide early enough that you want to do this, separating physically the noisier spaces from the areas where you want to be more quiet can save you a great deal of money. So I thought that was a really interesting little takeaway. And then lighting, we talk about daylight, glare and shadows, all can be issues. Illumination ratios, so if I get up and walk away from my desk, how much is tolerable in terms of the light change? And that 1 to 3 was found to be quite a well accepted known area that kind of works. Don't go beyond that. We looked at photophobia and flicker rates, and lots of people had said, oh, it's the fluorescent lights, they are the enemy. Actually, LED lights can be just as bad, if not worse. We need to watch the component compatibility. So our lighting team are quite good at explaining that to me as to the driver compatibility and how important that was to make sure you don't get a flicker. And when you get quite often in a domestic setting like a dimmer switch, you can quite often inadvertently be introducing a flicker. Not everyone will see it. We have discovered during the process of the PAS and beyond that a neurodivergent brain can often see a flicker that we thought humans previously couldn't see. So there's going to be some really interesting research in these areas. Also the colour temperature and how important that was. So a warmer white is much less intrusive on the brain than a white light. I also want to add here that daylight, we can tolerate a lot more from daylight than we can from artificial lighting in terms of brightness and colour temperature. It's just how we're made. There is a unique quality in pure daylight that we haven't yet got in our general fittings that we buy. And the flicker can cause obviously a great deal of disorders. So it can cause eye strain, headaches, migraines, etc. We know that in health and safety terms, that if there's a flicker on a light, it can even change whether a moving part looks like it's moving or not. So it can be quite dangerous. But people with vestibular and balance conditions can be very disorientated by flicker. So this is the lighting temperature. Just a quick look at this. If you get the really blue lighting, that's likely to disturb circadian rhythm. Certainly in the UK, we've heard a lot about blue light and making our devices default to a warmer setting as we get towards evening time. And some people, I'll come back onto RNAB, but RNAB project, when we worked on that, people with sight loss do tend to err towards the bluer light because they've lost some vision and they need the focus, the acuity to be sharper. But if you've got neurodivergent, you're going to be more akin to working with warmer lighting. It's much less fatiguing for you. We also have to consider light pollution and LED streetlights, and so the disturbance that we impose on other people there as well. So generally, warmer is relaxing, cooler aids alertness, and I think we've got to be super careful when we're looking at hospital wards and living accommodation hotels, where something is 24/7 potentially, and what sort of lighting we're imposing. And I think there's a huge emphasis really that should be for, can we have adjustable lighting for everyone, please? And then surface finishes, which often work with the lighting that you provide. The colours, not bright, but muted rather than vivid. Biophilic patterns, for example, much less intrusive on the brain. And then really avoiding intense patterns on stairs or where movement happens because you're walking over it or past it. And that will in turn help and both gate the way we step and our perception. Because some patterns are much harder for the visual cortex to process. I had a project that had a lot of timber in it, which is a biophilic feature and would normally be very nice. This is just a black and white drawing, so you don't know which project it is. But as you can see through here, and where they'd got some lines crisscrossing with it, it caused the most awful visual disturbance, which was not expected, because you don't often see the full mock-up of, I've lost the word. You don't often see elevations on everything that you see on a floor plan. So sometimes these things are missed until they actually start to be built. But patterns can cause eye ache, headaches, migraine, etc., and that loss of balance. Common sources of pattern finishes, obviously tiling with a grout in a different colour, or louvers where slits of light come through, Venetian blinds with the same, perforated sheet materials, and even entrance mats that are kind of often silver and black laying grid systems. As you walk across them, it does something rather strange to the eyes. So lots of fine detail to consider as you'll probably get hearing from me. I think also in the fixtures, fittings and furniture, again, low noise. So hand dryers were a particular enemy. There are many of them that are very super efficient, are almost turbocharged. They make the sound of an airplane. So trying to get low noise hand dryers is what we're pushing for in the UK, or a paper towel alternative so it's not imposed on someone. And we know the young children hate these noisy hand dryers and hold their ears. It's quite distressful for them. So using natural materials in other ways as well, and just familiarity and ease of operation of devices that we choose to put in, rounded corners on furniture and so on. That brings me on to safety and recovery and this section 14. I think with hindsight, we probably should have called the what quiet spaces or the quiet rooms its own section, because it's quite a heavy section. It's really, really good. My colleague at work, Toa Sadia, who was one of my students at the time, did her MSc dissertation on sensory rooms for autism. And her findings were really, really good and thorough, and hundreds of people taking part. And so that largely influenced that quiet rooms section, with her blessing, of course. But we also touch on emergency evacuation and how, neurodivergent people may need extra measures. We tend to think of physically disabled people as needing assistance to get out of a building, but it could be someone with neurodivergence, because you've got the fire alarms sounding, you may have a visual alert beacon flashing at you, there'll be crowds. It's really quite a recipe for sensory overload. So we need to think about that a bit more. So this is the quiet restorative spaces section. It is a quiet space. It isn't sensory stimulating. I do think the sensory rooms could have gone in as an extra if when we redo it, or when we add to it or anything. And you can provide some sensory stimulation in this area, but under the user's control. And typically this will be a room for one, maybe two people, someone with someone supporting. Good choice of seating, can get grounded near the floor, maybe a beanbag, good acoustics, adjustable lighting, muted colours, limited clutter. There's some nice checklists in the standard if you want to have a look at that. My elevator pitch when I talk about the standard, if I had to do it in 2 seconds, I'll say, look, what we're trying to do here is we are doing the 3 Cs. We want to provide an environment that has clarity, gives choice back to the users, and has a place of calm somewhere. And if you get those three together, you're basically giving users back some control. So since the PAS was published, there's been a lot going on. I contributed to BS 30416, which is the menopause standard I'll come on to in a second. There's a white paper on healthcare and lighting because our hospitals were being affected by the light and the flicker. I did the Sport England guidance, which has got the stakeholder engagement, but has also made PAS 6463 key reading. Sensory mapping research I've mentioned, lighting in toilets, that's come into our latest building regs. They're suddenly quoting PAS 6463 for the sensor lighting as you go into a toilet. So it fades in and fades out gradually now, instead of shocking you. So wow, that's bright. There's various research papers, guidance document for higher education, the just loads. So, I mean, look at this at your leisure. The Scottish schools, when it's underway at the moment, we've also got a suicide prevention standard that's just come out, and that quotes PAS 6463 as well. So it's getting out there quite well. This is the 30416 on menopause. I'll just quick look at this. Very similar target audience. Anyone managing individuals' workloads or work environments. So it includes architects, interior designers, etc. This is about 70 pages. The vast majority of it is around policies and procedures and support. There is a section here, 5.2, physical aspects of work. And when I talk, I won't go through all of these, but you can see how closely aligned this is to PAS 6463. You know, we're talking about color, temperature, lighting. Can we have adjustable temperatures so people can feel cooler or warmer by the lighting, because that can have a calming environment for them. Providing blinds or curtains to block out bright sunlight can feel very intensive during perimenopause. That's the same for neurodivergence. Flicker is the same. Thermal comfort. Many people can't self-regulate their kind of body temperature and things like that. So that happens both in menopause, but it could also help because of some neurodivergent trait. And the biophilic design principles are given. Anything that connects us back with nature is generally very, very helpful. So lots of things you can do. Thermal comfort, we've got a standard now on PPE, personal protective equipment in the UK, that's starting to look at adjustability for people with different disabilities and so on. And I think this is another level, because we're also looking at the finishes and the fabrics that people are forced to wear on a day-to-day basis with uniforms. Cool to touch materials, acoustic sound. So lots and lots here. VOCs again. Furniture that allows us to stretch, move around and sit. Isn't that what we want for neurodivergent people too? Yes. So lots and lots of overlap. Toilets. People might go off to find a toilet to get a quiet place in an emergency, or maybe the quiet room is booked or it's too far away. These self-contained toilet facilities, wash basins inside the cubicles, calm yourself down, splash your face, etc. Very, very useful. But they're also useful for people using sustainable menstruation products. So there are lots of reasons why these things overlap, and I think it just makes for better buildings. And then in specific spaces, for the menopause and the menstrual, we're talking about access to cooler areas in the building, but equally that could work for some people who can't control body temperature, who are neurodivergent as well. So a huge amount of overlap there. I'm going to very quickly now, because I think I am running a bit tight for time, talk about this building, which is won 4 awards. Well, one for an individual, the project manager there, Tricia, won last week. But it's won several other awards, and mainly around its ability to kind of lead the way on accessibility, inclusion, sight loss, and neurodiversity. They wanted to be a beacon of accessibility, so a few pictures of the building there. It's a small building, small retrofit, fast track project, started early 2022, so the timing was perfect for me. This is the dream client. He says, I want to be a beacon of accessibility. I'd like to do everything. How do I do that? Which meant that we pushed boundaries on sight loss. We did everything that's in the good practice in our British standards on accessibility. And then when I asked about, well, do you want to do PAS 6463? It's not published yet, but I think there's quite a lot in there that you could look at. I said, yes, let's do everything. So it was a really good test because it's a multi-purpose building, has low vision clinics for sight loss. It's got a little retail shop in there selling products for people with sight conditions. It has their offices, meeting and entertainment spaces. It's got some recording studios for talking books and a radio broadcast booth because they have their own radio station. It was a considerable downsizing project from Judd Street and changed the way everybody works. It's hot desking rather than fixed desk most of the time. And their occupancy, I think, the drop in size was enormous. But also to say that 15% of their staff have visual impairment, and many of the visitors had visual impairment as well. So stakeholder engagement was really key. They did some great acoustics. I won't go through all of this now, but I would say acoustics are often overlooked because they're invisible, but they're so critical to people with sight loss or who are sensitive to sound. And in this building, they had recording studios that were located directly above a busy underground line. So acoustics was even more important. The branding colours were bright, so they really wanted to do something like this over reception. And I said, oh, I don't think that quite fits with the PAS. And we ended up with something a bit gentler. They have a flare path around the building. You can probably just see it here because we've got a grey bobbly lino in amongst grey carpet squares. We've kept it quite monotone now, but normally this is, I think it's in a purple, where you can imagine that's kind of a sensory overload to have a bright purple running through a lot of building space. So we was trying to avoid that. We tested it with visually impaired people. They could detect it fine with a long cane underfoot, and you could kind of see where it was with monochromatic vision as well. Their manifestations are normally picking their bright pinks and other colours. We've just used the pops of colours here for cushions instead, and we really toned down their manifestations on the glazing considerably. In terms of lighting, that's where I think they made the biggest impact. They had a lot of stakeholder engagement before they even bought the building. They then did user testing in their existing office, and deliberately our lighting team chose compatible driver and fittings that would eliminate flicker. But every set of 4 desks, they're in kind of aisles, every 4 desks can change on, off lighting, dimmed lighting, or colour temperature control. So that is extraordinary. Still don't know anyone else in the UK that has done that, but hugely successful for them. Lots of people coming back to the office because the lighting was better than their home environment. And interestingly, they discovered that they had a lot of neurodivergent staff they didn't know about who suddenly said, oh, I feel I can come to the office more now because you've done this and I know you understand. So really, really helpful. They've educated others through various means. So having the building, we run tours. There are tours every month of this building. It's tiny. It's a quite big use of their time, but it's invaluable to actually be able to show architects and say, you don't have to copy this, but copy the principles, please, of what they tried to do here. They've got ceiling rafts. They had to have these acoustic panels above the reception desk to control some of the noise, conversation. Instead of having the rainbow ones, for example, we did them in the monochrome colours of our light reflection values, which enables them to use that as a teaching aid when they're talking about why visual contrast is important to visually impaired people. We've got tactile billet taps, which have extended ears for easy grip, but also got braille on them and the colourful and so on. They've got edge definition to the cupboards. The wall cupboards are half width so that they don't overhang the surface. So lots and lots of these things were done specifically for sight loss, including tactile signage and braille everywhere. Symphony donated some marine edge worktops, which means if you spill your hot drink, it doesn't go all over you or on the floor. It gets captured. So really important, but little features, and their signage is just super clear and very well done. They've got quiet spaces there. You've got options. You've got a quiet floor and you've got a collaborative floor. It doesn't always work out that way. So when you design something in from the start, don't always assume people will use it the way you've designed it, because theirs didn't. People did the reverse. But nevertheless, they've got a nominal quiet floor and a collaborative floor. They've got a dedicated private serenity room for staff, which is amazing. One-way window, gentle lighting, great acoustics, soft finishes, muted colours, floor cushions and a sofa. So you've got lots of choice, really nice space to use. as well as down by the clinics on the ground floor. They have a much smaller multi-purpose room, would really only readily accommodate one person, perhaps somebody else popping in to support them, that can be used for either faith or like a pocket quiet space. If you just had a sight diagnosis that's bad news, you can get obviously naturally upset, so that it can be used in that context, whereas staff might use the kind of slightly bigger room upstairs. The key features of that space, again, keep good acoustics, adaptable lighting, etc. So I'm going to finish there. There's some books here of different things that we've done and others are doing that I think might be of interest to you that are from the UK. And I'm now really pleased and excited to be hearing some of your questions, I hope. And I think Valerie's going to share these slides in one form or another later, I think. Is that right, Valerie?
What we're going to do, Jean, is share you with your slides. Yes.
Okay,
We aren't taking
brilliant.
you out of the picture. This is a package so that people who were unable
Okay.
to be here, or for those of us that were here and you delivered Christmas early, this is a lot of information. You were so
Sorry,
generous.
and I've been talking fast, so I do apologise.
You have been talking fast. People are going to want a second bite at it, and within 2 weeks, it'll be on our website, freely available to people who were here and want that second bite, and people who couldn't make it today. So we are going to now move to, somebody's asking, please put the slide of books back on screen for another few seconds. Can we do that?
Okay. I can. Let me
It
see
seems a
if I'm
small
covering
thing
up.
we could do.
Let me see if I'm can go back. I think it's that one. And then how do I get back?
There you go.
That one.
That one.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, this one. Yeah.
Is that the right one?
I think so.
Good. Okay. I'll leave that on while we're talking.
Okay. Now I'm finding that people are responding both in chat and in in Q&A. So I'm going to jump between the two of them, Jean, and shoot these to you as quickly as I can. I would have to say that everyone is quite thrilled, which is always terrific. And we'll go to our man who stayed up the latest, and that is our friend Dr. Hosono in Tokyo, wondering about leading people with brains that work differently. He's particularly concerned with dementia, how to lead people to designated toilets. Do you address that at all? It's finding things in public spaces. Is that at all familiar?
We do talk about sticking to the well-known icons, which in the UK is a very particular male and female symbol. So basically, the female symbol has a kind of skirt and legs together, a single stem, and the man has his legs astride. So it's very different. With a visual impairment, you can see it from a long way away. Now, people don't always do that. They kind of deviate. In RNIB, interestingly, we did use, they had a lot of all gender toilets, or gender neutral, unisex, whatever you want to call them. And they had a toilet symbol on them, but there isn't just one type of toilet symbol. And people with dementia won't be familiar with that symbol, I don't think, on the doors, but they might recognize it as what it is. So I think the male and female tends to work quite well because it's been used for some time, even if you put them both on a door. But I'd love to know if the professor knows of a different way that works better.
Well,
I think the toilet symbol's usually
Dr.
what people
Hosono
use.
is very involved with the Japanese Toilet Association, so he may well know. They do extensive research. So Nat, please share that with us, and we'll share it with Jean. And now, if you'd like to go to sleep, please do. It's about 3 in the morning there.
Oh dear.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a question from a dear friend and a member of our board of directors, and that is Dr. Erin Friedlander. She's a professor of medicine. She's also a parent and a designer. So she's got kind of a little bit of everything, but deep expertise. Thank you for this exceptional presentation. Grateful for your work. She's increasingly aware of people craving sensory engagement, having trouble with the attempt to dampen environments. How do you suggest we balance this want for some people to be more deeply engaged with environments for soothing and joy, given there is a need to also meet the needs of people seeking hypo and hyper stimulation within this population?
It is an interesting one, and I've always said that, and this is why the earlier work stalled, was because people said, "But you can't. This is impossible because everybody's so different." But what you have to do is provide different spaces and different means. So even where we've got just a quiet room, we have a cupboard that you open, and it's got soft blankets, and it's got things that are tactile or stimming. We have some seats that move and some that don't. So it's always about providing that variation and giving people the choice to choose themselves. One of the things that came up against recently was in a school kind of environment that people will throw in a sensory room and then put a child in it and say, well, they liked it yesterday, and then not have that understanding that every day we are different and the circumstances are different. So I think we have some way to go on this, really. But we need to cater for both. I did have someone call me once, an architect, I think, and he said, "Oh, you're that lady that wants magnolia paint everywhere," and I really don't. When we talk about muted colors, you can have every color in the rainbow that exists. There isn't a no color a color you can't have. You're just muting it. So if you took a pot of paint and added 5% black to it, of any color you can think of, even your brightest pink, that will mute it down. It almost turns it into a heritage type tone of the same color. So we can still have rich and interesting and lovely environments. And many people benefit from being able to kind of hold a cushion that's maybe corduroy, and the kind of, there's lots of things that we find very soothing that we can easily provide with extra additions, I think.
Colors
I
melt
don't know
back.
if that fully answers
I
Erin's.
think that is a reasonable answer.
Okay.
Another question, actually, this is Dr. Freelander again, but I think we're all wondering about how do we test for the effectiveness post-occupancy? How do we basically make the case for this because we are able to point to data that tells us that it did make a difference? Have you done anything on that yet, Jean?
We haven't got the data yet because the RNIB is the only building that I'm aware of that did everything in the PAS.
Okay.
So other people, other organizations are kind of cherry picking what they can and can't do, probably because of budget. And I think the RNIB, because they were a charity for people with sight loss, and because they have this ambition to be a beacon of accessibility, it was very important to them to do it all. Their users, and they did a lot of stakeholder engagement. And I think where I am having opportunities to do stakeholder engagement, that can drive it forward. People, sometimes what happens, we do stakeholder engagement, they collect all this data, and then sometime later they'll say, oh, value engineering has arrived. I guess you use the same term, but
yes, we do.
And we want to take out the acoustics in this corridor. I'm like, well, I've just checked the stakeholder engagement, and that was particularly problematic. It was the thing people complained of. Okay, we'll just need to do something else then. And they go and pick on something else. So I agree, the data is really, really important. I don't have it. I have it on projects, but not all.
I think we all long for those clients that say, I want to do everything. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that we're finding is that higher education is one of the places where the prevalence of brains that work differently is so dominant that is a place where the success and retention of students can make an enormous difference. We are actually hoping for a client that says, I want to do everything in a higher ed environment, where I think we could really get a chance to measure, did this work, and figure out what those measurements are.
Yeah, I mean, Toa Sadia, who I mentioned had done the research on the quiet rooms on autism, the environment where it mattered most to people was anywhere where they learned, where they would do learning. So that could be a workplace, but it would certainly be a university or a school. Those were the environments where they absolutely felt they couldn't manage without the quiet room and the choice of quietness and the choice of in control that you need, which is challenging, isn't it, in school environments.
If I might just interject, one of the things that we have found in recent years is that clients in STEM environments, science, technology, engineering, and math, are finding that some of their biggest new talents are people whose brains work differently. A neurodiverse population are, they are finding their way to careers in STEM, and those employers are thinking, how do we create an environment where these people can perform at their best, be comfortable, content, and stay? Because retention in those environments, when it takes a couple of years to bring someone to the point where they're actually useful as an employee, is a point at which a lot of people leave if they aren't getting an environment that's working for them. That's a departure moment. And I think those are places that are really interesting, where there's an economic argument. We've got to figure out how to make it work, and the built environment is a part of that.
Yeah, we've had quite a few STEM clients since the PAS 6463 came out, that they know that their staff need it.
Yeah, and both disclosed and undisclosed. Wonderful point on that. Thank you, Jean. A question about wayfinding. Any approaches to design for wayfinding that you have found particularly successful for neurodiverse users throughout your research or practice? I mean, I think we're all working on wayfinding projects, but I think it's a reasonable question. What are the most significant issues, other than clarity, which you've said repeatedly?
I think there was a question on transport and wayfinding as well. And I think any of these bigger spaces, you've always, you have the directional signs, but then you've got to confirm. So I am somebody who can get lost in my own house almost, and always thought it was me, and it's hereditary. I've just found out both my brothers are the same, and my father certainly was. And I think it is some sort of trait coming down, but it's and it's really difficult, because what you need is more confirmation than your neurotypical good wayfinder. So I kind of constantly worrying, and I really identified with this chapter. And I went to a lecture at the time by somebody who had autism and ADHD and something else, who was talking about her struggles with wayfinding, and I listened, like, well, I have to do that and more, and I still get lost. So it wasn't new to me at all. And it was about having different methods. So, for example, preview is important. The maps don't work for everyone, so having it in different formats. The symbols that you use are really important. The colors, don't change the colors halfway through. So if you've got, and this is a problem I know with big portfolios like university campuses, where you might have a newer building added and you might go for a new style of sign. If the colors are different and the styles are very different, whilst that might be what you want going forward, when you go from one building to another, it means the brain's got to relearn and can't quite, and it takes a while to acclimatize with each signage system. And everybody's using different symbols. So it's not just people with dementia who struggle with that, it's all of us, I think, that it's like, oh, so that symbol here means this, but in that building over there, it means something slightly different. So there's a lot to it, and I think it's a very rich and big, it's quite a fat section in the PAS, actually. Worth having a look.
And I think in our experience, that issue of affirming you're going in the right direction is critical.
Yeah.
It's very much requires tailoring to the particular environment. There's no hard and fast rules on this.
Yeah, and the apps are really good. So if someone's lucky enough to have the smartphone charged and on them, an app that can kind of confirms that you're still going in the right way can be good. So we, RNAB, and I didn't mention the technology much there, but they've got NaviLens installed in the building. They've also got Good Maps, I think, that will navigate for you. So lots of apps for sight loss, but those apps also help people like me who can't wayfind. They're very reassuring, but you do need, the proper signs and the maps as well. We can't just assume everyone's going to have a great smartphone on them and it's working.
And it's working. This is actually from one of our designers who is legally blind, Paul DeFazio, and he is asking about cost. Very complimentary about the exciting presentation, but there's so many things that could be great if it was a wealthy client who could do anything. What have you assessed in terms of recommendations, in terms of low versus high cost, impact versus investment in expensive solutions? Have you given any analysis to the cost implications of the recommendations?
We haven't got an analysis. I could tell you that acoustic treatments are expensive, but our acoustics team, as I mentioned earlier, said to me, if you start early enough looking at where you need the quiet space, the collaborative spaces, if that's all planned early enough, you can separate them, physically separate them, to make the acoustics much more modest. And I don't think we do that enough. We don't kind of set in place where the different areas are going to be and how you're going to provide that mix. And I think it would be really helpful for people to look at it through a neurodiversity lens to say, okay, yeah, well, logically we thought this space should go next to this, but maybe it shouldn't because of cost and our budgets. Now, the RNIB have won all those awards. They're a charity. They don't waste their money. They didn't have an enormous budget and they guarded it. What happened when the value engineering came along was like, no, you can't take my lighting system because our users need it, but I'll bring the furniture from the old building, or I'll keep the existing, because it was retrofit, I'll keep the meeting rooms. They're not quite what we wanted, but we can make them work. But we need the new lighting. So it's got to be an informed client, I think, as well. But they really did. Some of their furniture, they won't mind me saying, they have a living room, which is a living lab where they test products. They fitted it out from IKEA. Their kitchens are from Howdens, which is a kind of everyday kitchen supply. It's not like your normal top range. They can replace them later if they need to. They had to ring fence the budget at that time, and the thing was to get the acoustics and the lighting and the wayfinding perfect. So that's what people needed. And thereafter, and so they brought their tables and chairs and everything. They bought an off-the-peg reception desk, which very few clients would consider doing, but they've won 4 awards. And people come and they're queuing to tour that building because it works. And it doesn't mean copying their color scheme or anything like that, but copy the principles they went through, putting the users first.
Thank you. Actually, another question about some of the remarks up front about defining neurodiversity, and someone is asking, what data are you using? What would be your best guess of the percentage of the population that these issues affect? Love to hear your response to that. We've been dealing with that. Also, you should know that in the United States, the cognitive spectrum of disability is now the primary reason for disability. It is the most prevalent reason for disability in the United States. So curious about your percentages, because we have been gradually refining how we talk about the percentage of the population who could be considered to have brains that work differently. We are all neurodivergent, but what are you using in terms of a percentage?
When we first finished the PAS, by the time we finished it, I was at the point where I said, I don't think this is 15% of the population. I think at least 40% will benefit from this. And now I would kind of go further than that. So the figures that are coming out around the schools, so I think Scottish schools and English schools are coming out the same figures. It's getting on for almost 40% of children now having assisted learning packages. And the vast majority of that will be around neurocognitive profile and something different in the way they process information. We don't know why. Is it just the recognition of it? Or is it, are we just in a different place and we're recognizing this more? Is it technology? I don't know. But I do think a huge part of society, I'm not even sure that neurotypical should be people who don't experience all this. It probably should be the other way around. Any day now, the bigger group is going to be the neurodivergent group, which is a bit, will change. I don't know what that does to the term, but a bit of a mess.
We are fond of reminding people that every day our brains work differently.
Yeah.
and that not one of us has predictable brains every day of the week. There will be a copy of the presentation somebody is asking, but it will be, not the presentation, but it will be Jean's entire presentation will be available within 2 weeks on our website. And this is another one of our team, Sean Marley Duncan, who is really one of our key people on neurodiversity and is a user expert. I'd like to know how you have approached staff engagement in interaction with spaces and visitors to work in conjunction with the built environment. I think we are all committed around user engagement. Have you also engaged staff? in the process of really thinking this through, or perhaps being involved
So
in
when I
hearing.
when I say users at RNIB, it was the staff with sight loss, staff with it, yeah. And on most of my projects, other than Moorfields where it was patients, most of my projects will be kind of office type environments where it has been the staff that have been engaged with. Generally speaking, we would do a kind of informal interview and a chat with different groups. We find it helps sometimes to split by group or interest. So, which means that you can get, lots of neurodivergent people in a room together, but sometimes you have to break it down. We also, and what I was writing about in the Sport England guidance for the stakeholder engagement in that is that for some people, being in a room with a lot of other people is not great. So they might want to do an email, or they might want to do a phone call, or they might not want to make eye contact. So there's lots of other stuff that goes on, some of these traits that might mean a different communication style. So we offer different ways to interact with us. So can be a survey, but ideally we would have a direct communication at some point.
Thank you, Jean. I think among the things that people are asking, people are saying if it's non-compliant, it's against civil rights. In truth, it's a complicated crosswalk because, at least in the United States, we have a protected class of people, which is extremely broad and includes, of course, mental and physical reasons for a functional limitation. Our standards are focused almost exclusively on physical and sensory as understood to be blind or sight and hearing. Yeah. We have really got an empty space as it relates to the brain, and we have always had an empty space. And I think that is part of what is difficult because people say, just tell me what I have to do. This is beyond what you have to do, at least based on the standards, with the exception that it is about your obligation to create an equitable experience and non-discrimination for people who are in the protected class. And many people in the protected class, more every year, are in a class where it is a set of conditions that are untouched by our standards or codes for accessibility. And I think that's one of the things that is a challenge in getting clients to appreciate how important this is, because it isn't about what do I have to do based on standards. You do have to do it based on equity and non-discrimination, but not based on the existing standards. If you meet all the standards, you've left this group out. And that's an important piece.
We are the same. We have an Equality Act, which talks about protecting the individual, so you'd be captured by that. Our British standard does talk about, I don't think it uses the term neurodiversity, I think they say sensory differences in there, but it doesn't say how. So the PAS standard is the one that you would go to now. But it's interesting to me that I've seen the PAS standard being quoted in planning policy and in the building regs on that crazy kind of toilet transition, just on that. So it's like, it's so interesting to see how it creeps into things. It's going a long way, but I think we've been talking about it a lot. So I've probably given 200 talks on this subject. And then other people, it's kind of like it cascades down. And the neurodiversity representative groups are pushing it out there a lot as well, and they're doing lots of actions on the back of it. And I think that's helping. But, you could quite easily have a compliant building with building regs in the UK without touching the PAS 6463. So we have the same issue fundamentally.
Yeah, absolutely true here. And I think part of it is really, just our 2 cents. What design can do. Design is a quite inexpensive investment in improving the performance and experience of all of your users. It's a one-time investment for the most part, and that is a powerful economic argument.
There's an awful lot in that PAS actually that I feel is either very inexpensive to do, or it's something that's on the list of things that you'd probably change every 5 years anyway, like your decor. So these aren't all decisions. So I think it really lends itself to the retrofit market as well, which, the RNAB kind of endorses. And I think that's why the architects in the UK like it. Because this is what they do. They pick finishes, they decorate, they change the lighting. These are all elements of FF&E that they can kind of do quite readily.
and knock back that rich set of colors of any kind, but knock them back a bit. We've had very good success with that too. Actually,
Yeah.
we have an artist and color specialist. Kimberly Collins-Germain has a question. One way to contribute to better wayfinding outcomes is to relate color sequencing to situations as we all understand from nature. If going from cooler colors to deeper colors, like underwater, toward warmer watercolors emerging into the sunlight. As you mentioned throughout this exciting talk, identifying with nature is very calming by itself. And that's an interesting challenge to think about that. Actually, Kim is the author of Nature of Color. If you can see that. You see Nature
Wow,
of
I need to go out and buy that then, don't I?
Yes,
That's the
it's
trouble with
pretty
these
terrific.
talks. I keep buying books after every one.
It's pretty terrific. And part of it is that she guides us through gathering our own understanding of nature by paying intense attention to color. But I think that's a very interesting idea. Thank you, Kimberly. That's a smart move.
And I think with the biophilic design, which is kind of growing quite a lot in the UK, it's mentioned a little bit in the past, but I wasn't so knowledgeable on it then as I am now. And I do think there's a lot of correlation between the two. So I'm really interested in what Kimberly says there.
Here's a really interesting question from Megan Blair, and I think all of us are hyper aware of this. With so much remote work now, is the digital work, how do you address the digital workplace, that people are working remotely? How do we think about, how do we support and inform remote employees on the topic of their home workspace and these types of environments? How do we get them to consider that? Because it remains a phenomenon that I don't think is going away. And certainly for many people that we would describe as neurodiverse, working at home presents an appealing option. But thinking about how do we help people to think about their own environment, their home environment, and how it could be better.
It's interesting because one of the areas I would like to have done in the past, which we didn't do, is housing. And it is an area that I've had a few conversations and a few discussion panels on. And our housing book does include neurodiversity. I think, did you say Jaquel had presented?
Yes, she did. Yes,
Yes.
and that was
So Jaquel, is an amazing person on housing, and she's very much included neurodiversity there. It's not in our housing regulations. I think what we have at Pure Happold is we have like allyship programs, and we have kind of get-togethers for different interest groups, and we've had quite a lot on neurodivergence, and that's the place where you can kind of talk about it in the same way as you would menopause, where people share ideas of things they've done in their home that help them.
No, that's a really interesting idea, because I think those have been useful groups in so many ways that people choose to join a group. Just a reminder on that book that we just talked about, it's the Inclusive Housing Design Guide, Jaquel Runnels. And we had that 2 months ago. That is actually archived on our website. But rich also, very much like Christmas came early for that session too. Let me just see if we have somebody, an anonymous attendee says, "Hi, Jean, thank you for highlighting the fact that the language and sensitivity to this was a huge part of PASS 6463. And I think it is a complex topic. I mean, neurodiversity. I think neurodiversity, in my mind, is always an opportunity to remind people that this was a term that people with this lived experience chose because of biodiversity. That biodiversity is a celebration of the diversity of nature. We don't want to forget that. I mean, whatever fine-tuning we might do, and there's been a long tradition of obnoxious terms to, in some ways, dress up issues of functional limitation or disability, and that continues to afflict this issue too. But I do think that neurodiversity and that link to biodiversity is a really important message for people to understand, that this comes from a celebration of what is.
Yeah, Very much so. I think it's interesting for me that the original research they got involved with was sensory comfort, sensory inclusion. And working on the Scottish Schools Guide, we started off with a title that had neurodiversity in it, and then decided it was broader than that. We were talking about sensory comfort and sensory inclusion, and it might include hearing loss and balance and things that were nothing to do with being neurodivergent, could be COVID related. So we're going more for the sensory inclusion title. I think you just need to be clear what's included within that. But words are interesting, aren't they? And I did wonder if they'd be different across the world.
I think everybody's struggling in the same way.
Yeah.
And one thing that is happening here, and I think it may be happening in England, is that many people with psychiatric disabilities are preferring to come under an umbrella that is a neurodiversity umbrella because they have struggled so much for equity that in many ways, though there's so far to go, neurodiversity has made more progress more rapidly. That it has been very difficult for people with psychiatric disabilities to be taken seriously, for the environment to be understood to be in any way relevant to their well-being. And I think that is a tragedy.
It's interesting that the Architects Mental Health Group have got their neurodiversity one now, and the suicide prevention has named the PAS as a good source. The connection between mental ill health and neurodivergence can be quite strong. It's not an automatic, but you know, obviously there's a greater risk. But I think I'd like to see well-being go up the agenda in less of a tokenistic way. I think Ben's Shannon's got some really good stuff in his book.
And that's, I think I just have the toolkit
That one.
out, just so people know.
It's the earlier book, and I think the toolkit was the second one, so that's chunkier.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very digestible.
The Happy Design Toolkit.
Yeah.
With Ben Sharon. Actually, there's an interesting question from somebody who has deep expertise in working with aging. This is Andrea Burns from Age Strong Commission in Boston. She finds LED lighting very unrestful. Do you have recommendations besides natural light for alternatives to LED?
So quite often when somebody's saying that, the LED lighting has not been installed in the way we'd like to see it, which might be too blue or too bright, or you know, and I think that's why it's so important to get adjustable lighting in both color, temperature and dimming, but also to make sure you don't get that flicker, which it might be that he's feeling but doesn't know he's seeing. And I know when we started home working for COVID, I was getting constant headaches, and I was talking to somebody who happened to be in the lighting team. And I said, I'm going to look at my lighting because I'm getting all these headaches. She said, well, you do know you've got a flicker. Like, I haven't got a flicker. I can't see. She said, look at the video of you. And I said, oh, I can see it on that. So the flicker was there, but with the naked eye, I couldn't see it. And she said, your brain will see that and feel that every day.
It's taking its toll whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I think it's worth having a look. I mean, because we're kind of stuck with the LED now. We can't go back to the incandescent, which is actually was a nicer light, and a lot of visually impaired people preferred it as well. There was something about the quality of the incandescent light, but obviously it doesn't work sustainably wise. I need to probably send you, Valerie, the healthcare paper we did on how to get the lighting right, because what happened here is the National Disability Team for Inclusion contacted BSI to be put in touch with me with a query about lighting. The government was given funding for sustainability reasons to some of our hospitals, quite a large sum of money. And so many hospitals were changing from the old lighting system, which was probably fluorescent, to LED. And suddenly people started to report they couldn't go to hospital anymore. And they were neurodivergent people that were sensitive to the lighting. And they were seeing the flicker, and the lighting was just being thrown in by a contractor. LED lighting, this is the spec, just throw it in. You need a lighting specialist to kind of say we've got the right compatibility, we've got adjustability over the beds and all the rest of it. So it could be just as simple as that. I can send you the design note on that.
That would be great.
But it was intended for healthcare, but I think it helps in other environments like schools as well.
I think that healthcare is the deep end of the pool, but it would be relevant everywhere. And I think just because we are fortunate to have colleagues on our board of directors who are lighting designers, we know that this issue of LED light is sometimes about how it was installed, sometimes it is about the age of the lighting, sometimes it is about the quality of the lighting. So it really requires somebody who really knows what they're doing to care that the LED lighting is installed properly and that you're buying something that is really something that's going to serve you well for a long time.
I mean, in extreme situations, sometimes in a workplace, you can't really do it in a hospital, but in other places, you can sometimes say, look, just turn this off, work with a floor lamp and a desk lamp, a nice one that gives you color temperature variation. The other thing you can sometimes do, and I've had somebody who was affected by the overhead lighting, it was too kind of blue for their brain. We put a task lamp underneath it, and because light will mix like paint, a really warm task light underneath it was kind of mixing and how it hit the surface of the desk. So there are some kind of tricks you could do.
One of our favorite things to do is really remind people that task lighting is a very low-cost way to radically alter the environment, including the idea that it actually creates your own concentration space. It defines a space around you in a way that overhead lighting will never do. Could you give folks your email, Jean? I think you put it on the, did you put it on the slide? I think you did. Could you say it? You don't have to put it back up.
Yes, it's just jean.hewitt, HEWITT, at bureauhappold.com. Should I put it in the chat? Is that helpful?
Sure. Why don't you put it in the chat? Thank you. Thank you. And I think somebody has asked about where do they find the paths. It's very easy to find. I think you just put that in on any search engine, and you pretty much will land on it. Nothing special. Thank you, Jean.
I should have said actually that quite often you still have to pay for a pass here in the UK, but on this one, my client at Sport England were very keen that it was pushed out further, and they were quoting it as key reference, so they sponsored its free issue.
Wonderful. I think actually, Jean, one of the things I've heard you talk about is this issue of the role of private funders to making some of this important work available. And I think it's a really important lesson that folks, you mentioned Furbo was one of the companies, Ecofarm was one of the companies, your own Borough Happold was one of the companies. And I think we really have to be thinking about making this a more prevalent priority when, particularly in our country anyway, government funding is going to be so constrained for anything that we care about. So I think looking to the private sector for the opportunity to pursue work that benefits an enormous number of people is something we have to do.
Can you still do that through your standards system? Because I do feel that had I just written a book even with the experts that we had, it probably wouldn't have taken off in such a way. But because it is seen as a British standard, it had that kind of consensus of opinion that matters to people.
It has an imprimatur. We have no method of that. No like method. But I use it as a story to share with people when I am speaking, because I think it's a method we should learn about and maybe imitate. Because the development of new standards takes forever. And one of our own people, Paul again, is asking about advice for neurodivergent folks or others who want to get involved with creating standards or guidance or influence standards. What are the possibilities and shortcomings of trying to influence the built environment through creating this kind of design guidance? I mean, I think we have a commitment around direct engagement, participatory design processes, and we do an extensive amount of work on that, always these days, with people whose brains work differently as part of that, whether we're working on public transit or streetscapes or museums or higher ed. But I think some people would like to be involved. I think you've told a story about the development of the paths, and that you had a team of people, 8 to 10 people who had lived experience, who were key players in making sure that you got this right. Any thoughts on how to, how to direct people to get engaged in the same kind of way?
Well, the BSI insist on picking the steering group, but they were looking on kind of LinkedIn and out there in the ether and talking to people, say, who do you know and who's done research in this area and everything. I think that's how they came up with the right group for it. So there might have been two or three that I suggested, and there might be two or three that I suggested that didn't get on. So it wasn't a kind of a given. But they came from a different sectors. Sometimes some people, you know, very focused on lived experience and maybe in a home setting or school setting, and other people in working environments. So there was quite a mix, and it just worked really well in collecting lots and lots of information in. If you wanted to do the same thing, I don't know how you would do it over there.
Well, part of it is that we have people we call user experts who are part of a variation of contextual inquiry research, you know, really looking at the intersection of the person and the environment, what's working, what's not working, what do you think would work better? And that's very tailored to the individual client. But it delivers every time, every time.
Amazing.
And I think one of the things that we want people to also think about, and join me in this if you agree, Jean, but I think one of the places that we could make a significant difference is to get design students to engage real people rather than inventing personas of people that they seek to design for. Or in architecture school, of not really thinking about architecture as a social art. How do we actually create vehicles for people to volunteer their time to be available to design students as experts that they can inform about why design matters so much in their lives? So just a pitch to think about getting people involved directly in the education of students, because there's no substitute for real people.
No, in my previous job, I wanted to set up a panel where people would volunteer and to be contacted to talk about their lived experience, but they'd have to be paid.
Yes, always
I mean,
paid.
yeah. But we never kind of quite got it going. I think there's some kind of protocol and etiquette, but you're well placed, I think, in a university to deal with that.
Jean, any last points? I think we have pretty much a lot of thanks and a lot of blessings to you for a very, very generous presentation.
Oh, I've just loved this conversation. It's just so exciting, and I've got a few things to go away and read now. Thank you as well.
Well, we are in your debt, my friend. I look forward to your next adventure. We're so happy that you shared everything that you're working on. I know I'm going to be talking about all of that, including the women's health issues that nobody talks about. So a great gift to share that important work. So our warm thanks, Jean.
Okay,
and our warm thanks to the audience for being as lively as I knew you would be.